Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us. Hello,
Which one was
Anne.
it starting? Oh, sorry. I was like, was I supposed to start?
No, hi, Anne.
Hi, Sarah.
I just threw Anne off because as we started recording and then we do this 10 seconds of silence, I burped and made her laugh. And then everything changed.
Everything changed.
How are you? Tell the listeners about your new status.
I am a master or a mistress. I don't know what it's done. School's done. It's great. Yay! And I can upgrade myself to UKCP in the UK, which is United Kingdom Counseling Psych. I actually don't really know what it stands for. It's the sort of regulatory body that exists, sort of, because one doesn't really exist here, but it does in that. But yay, we're excited. Yay. And it's done. And that's one less thing for me to worry about.
Speaking of not worrying about things, you can not worry about what you're going to wear.
Yeah, there we go.
By going to tinyurl.com/CWH merch. You can buy t-shirts. You can buy cell phone covers, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty cool. Stickers, yes, with our fun logo on them. So please purchase some merch if you want to support the podcast. You can also support us by donating at patreon.com/convos with a wounded healer. You can give us just as little as $1 a month, and then you have our undying love and affection. And also, if you're in the UK or US, we will send you a little welcome gift.
Yay!
And you can rate and review the podcast if you go to ratethispodcast.com/wounded healer.
Mm-hmm.
Anne and I recently discovered that apparently if people listen on Audible, they can rate and review the podcast. That was new to me. So thank you to the Audible listeners I literally for years have been leaving them. There are 4 of them. So thank you, Audible listeners, that I didn't even know were there until I signed up for Rate This Podcast.
Listeners.
Yeah.
I love it.
All right. So
yes,
we have I interviewed Trace for 2 hours, our guest. And so we're releasing this episode this week and then part 2 next week.
Yes.
And I've been really excited for everybody to hear about spiral dynamics. But for this episode, we're just going to mostly focus on Trace and his journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so Anne, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording.
Yeah.
Anne has some feelings.
So I had a really strong reaction to Trace. I started listening to the episode and I had just a really strong, I don't know about this guy vibes. And I kind of owned the part of me that is biased against sort of Christian megachurch things. And I know Trace said that it's a progressive one, but in my head I was like,
Well, he's not in that church anymore.
Oh no, but it just kind of tainted my brain against the situation. So once I started kind of noticing these kind of I don't know about this feelings, I was like, let me walk away from the episode for a little while and come back to it with just Trace, kind of acknowledging my own bias. And I gotta say, with all respect to Trace and the work he's done, and there's nothing he said that I disagreed with, he just hit me right in the privileged white guy who's in the wellness space. And I feel uncomfortable saying that because I want to respect him. I want to respect the work he's done. And I don't want to reduce it to any of that. But that's kind of what it pulled up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about this before we recorded. And I know that I think Trace would appreciate and be able to hold that he does come from a really privileged place. And I think it's super important for you to say this because other listeners may have that response too. And what I think is cool about how you and I relate is we both respect each other and we trust each other. And so I'm guessing, I'm making this up, but I'm guessing that you trust, if I trust Trace, that there's probably something about him that's okay.
Very that. Yeah. I was like pacing around my dining room listening to it. And I was like, Sarah knows Trace. Sarah has worked with Trace. And so I am trusting that either something's going on for me, something, this is a me thing, or what Trace is giving in this interview is not what Sarah works with on a regular basis, if that makes sense, or what resonates for you or resonates for you differently. But I didn't go all the way to like, this guy is a douchebag. Yeah. Like at no point, because he doesn't sound like one, but also because I trust you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I was able to sort of hang in without disconnecting from it completely.
Well, and it's interesting that you didn't disagree with anything that he said, too.
No, not at all. Yeah. There was nothing he said that I was like, everything he said, I was like, yeah, I'm on board with what you're talking about. Like,
yeah.
It was just very much a feeling and a vibe. And I think, I was hesitant to share this, but now that we're talking about it, I think it is important because we as humans do go off of our vibes so much. And it can be easy to discount people because of that, or we automatically shut something down because of that. And we shut ourselves off to possibility, right? Had I been listening to this podcast and not have to come and talk to you about it, I may have just been like, I'm just going to write this one off as one that's not for me and not finished it. And to be honest, it's nice to hear somebody with whom I'm not disagreeing. Well, in the first episode, there was nothing that struck me or hit me wrong. And, I'm kind of respecting that it did kind of tug at something in me. So don't know what that means yet, but hopefully it's helpful to all of our listeners just to hear that what my process is with understanding those feelings that come up for me. And in case anyone else has a similar reaction to this episode or really any, right?
Well, and I also think, what you're naming is an invitation, because one of the things on social media right now is people are saying like, yes, trust your gut, but then your gut also might be lying to you because of your trauma experience. And so that's what it hit, right? Because I can tell you that Trace is safe, but there's something inside you that is telling you that it's not safe. So like if I were your therapist, right, like we would be looking at this a little bit deeper and like really tuning into, okay, what does Trace trigger? Like what is coming up inside of you? And I would love to hear if you do any more of that work, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I think what you just hit on is right. And I think it's interesting because when I think about it, the idea of like trusting my gut, it wasn't coming from my gut, it was coming from like further up in my body, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not, that leans very much more towards like, it wasn't a like, you are not safe so much as it was, you are just not the messenger for me. Which is okay. Yeah. Like, and I can respect that for a lot of people. And if I met him in person, that could completely change, or maybe I don't even need to meet him in person, right? But in this moment, in listening to this episode, he was not the messenger for me, even though I agreed with the message.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for people to realize. And I think like this is not throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of situation, right? Yeah. Because like you said, if you didn't have to sit down and talk with me about this, you may then be like, well, anybody who talks about spiral dynamics is somebody that I'm not interested in. And that is something that is not for me at all, when that might not be true.
Yeah.
Love it. Dig it. Okay. Well, let's introduce Trace. Now that we've given him a really great setup, I love Trace. So yeah, you get to decide for yourself. So Trace Bell is an integration guide, transformational coach, and cultivator of emergence. He's passionate about the intersection of consciousness and systems change, and co-founded a nonprofit called Holon Institute that's dedicated to helping people heal the separation from themselves, each other, and nature. So please enjoy part 1 of my conversation with Trace Bell. Are you a therapist stepping into a leadership role for the first time? Or maybe you've been in a leadership position for a while, but you're bumping up against new struggles. It's a transformative journey and one that can be deeply rewarding, but also filled with unique challenges. Many therapists find themselves in leadership positions because of their exceptional therapeutic skills. Yet leading, supervising, or managing others requires a whole new set of competencies not typically covered in graduate school. Our Authentic Leaders group is here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. And we believe that the journey is best undertaken with the guidance of experienced mentors alongside fellow learners. The next cohort of Authentic Leaders will run November 2024 through June 2025, meeting once monthly on Fridays for 90 minutes. We'll also have some additional opportunities for connection and support along the way. Join me in this journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. Trace!
Sarah!
So now we'll be singing the whole thing. I forgot to tell you that part before we recorded, that this is now a musical.
Oh, great. I'm not super confident in my singing voice, so this should be a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for being here. This is the second time we're recording this, and we can talk about that because there's actually a lot that has to do with the conversation. But why don't you introduce folks to who you are and what you do?
Hello, everyone. My name is Trace Bell. I am a transformational coach, an integration guide, a writer, soul activist. I kind of throw a lot of different titles at myself to kind of describe what I do. I also have been referring to myself recently as a cultivator of emergence, someone that helps cultivate and facilitate the process of emergence, which I can get into. And yeah, I'm a friend of Sarah's and very excited to be on this podcast and be in conversation with you.
Yeah. So just to give listeners the whole backdrop. So I had listened to your dad's podcast when he had you on, where you all talked about spiral dynamics. Me, we, and everybody, right? That's the series.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll link that in the show notes for sure. I listened to that. I reached out to you. We tried to record a podcast and I had literally no voice, but I was like, I am so jazzed up about this topic. I need to talk to this guy. And it didn't go terribly, but it's just my voice is just awful. And then I had a fallout with somebody who was terrified by spiral dynamics and could not air it. The interview just had way too much bad energy. So then we started working together for, was it an 8-week period or was it actually even more than that? Was it 16 since we did it?
It was 8 weeks.
Yeah.
8 weeks.
Yeah. So we were working together and just talking about the spiral, and we'll get into this, people. Don't worry. Spiral dynamics. I'm obsessed with it. So yeah, we just became friends, mutual admirers of each other and our work and what we're trying to do in the world. And so I'm very happy I can call you a friend now.
Yes, I feel the same way. Very grateful for you.
Yeah. Well, let's start your journey. How did you become, I love soul activist and cultivator of emergence. How does one become that? Where did you start?
Yeah, great question. And I've had sort of an interesting journey. My dad is a pretty well-known and popular author who was originally a author in the sort of evangelical Christian space. Him and my mom started a megachurch in West Michigan when I was a little kid that became the fastest growing megachurch in the Midwest. And it was a very progressive megachurch, which I know sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but for in that and then in that region of the United States, it was very progressive and kind of pushing the boundaries of what people understood as church. And my dad was writing books at the time, and a couple of his books got well known and got popular. And then in 2011, he wrote a book called Love Wins. That's premise was that heaven and hell aren't physical places that we go to when we die. Heaven and hell are metaphors for states of being that we create here on earth, which I think to a lot of people is yeah, duh. In the evangelical world, that was heresy. And it started essentially a holy war within the evangelical and Christian culture in this country, because you were either with my dad and you agreed with him or you weren't. It's almost like he drew a line in the sand. So I grew up with my dad teaching spirituality to people, writing about spirituality, helping people on their growth journeys. He, after Love Wins, we moved out to California and he kind of matured into a spirituality that still referenced biblical text, but it wasn't overtly Christian anymore. He kind of became more of a spiritual teacher that was teaching to everyone rather than just a Christian teacher. So I, growing up, never had Christianity forced onto me from my parents. My parents never told me to believe anything specifically. They let me have total freedom and independence and thought. So I never considered myself religious or never considered myself a Christian, but I was always very spiritually curious. I always had this, I feel like, just intuitive knowing that who I was had been traveling in many lifetimes before, and this incarnation of Trace was a continuation of other lifetimes. I just had all these spiritual intuitions and was very curious. And I got very passionate about politics when I was a teenager. And I was very, very passionate about social change, social transformation, and politics was kind of the arena that I saw that was sort of the vehicle for that in a way. So I got very passionate about politics, decided to go to UCLA and study political science. And then when I was at UCLA, I started to have some, I would call them, transcendent, spiritual, mystical experiences that really put me more on the path to doing work similar to my dad, of helping people directly on their growth journeys, helping people embody a deeper spirituality and a connection to something beyond themselves. I started teaching the consciousness framework, spiral dynamics, that we're going to get into. So I really credit my life trajectory to having total independence to find whatever really moved me and connected with me, and finding that, and then having my own like real deep embodied experiences that gave me a sense that I'm here to help people find that intersection between their soul gifts and also what the world needs right now. I believe we're in a time of transition, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done in this time of transition, new stories that need to be told, new spaces that need to be created. And I started to, because my dad has such a large audience, I started to understand that I could be really helpful in helping guide people and help them uncover what their soul gifts are and then what the world needs right now. So that's sort of like a kind of short version of how I got to where I am.
Well, it's interesting because I can't remember what I was listening to. This is my toxic trait, is listening to so many podcasts, I can't cite them properly. But somebody was talking about the initiatory process that we have to go through to healing and to find whatever our purpose is. And, the one that I think most of us think about is trauma, right? Like, and I would say that was my initiatory process in the world, but yours was freedom, which I think is just more rare. And it's beautiful when that actually happens.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. A lot of it was freedom. And I've had my fair share of trauma, and trauma has definitely been an initiation for me. Before I really went on my trauma healing journey and actually had that as an intention, I think I naively assumed that my journey was trauma-free because of that. I felt like freedom was a main theme. And it was really helpful and powerful for me to integrate trauma healing into my life and really see some of my shadow, because I had a life with a lot of freedom and a lot of opportunities because of who my dad was. It was easy to neglect and ignore the fact that there was trauma, because we're all humans. We all experience trauma. I mean, I
believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. We all have some level. Just to be human means that there's some level of trauma that we experience. And to really get honest and real about that and see that part of me was another kind of initiation. So it was almost like freedom and trauma were both kind of played an initiatory role in my life.
Yeah. Which probably almost automatically sets you up for a wider perspective. Because when I think about how I've become who I am now, it's definitely a trajectory, like through the trauma to the other side of the trauma. And now I feel like I can see things more clearly. But I imagine there's like some sort of like titration that you're able to do when you're like, on this one side, I've got this amazing freedom. On this other side, I've got this thing that's like keeping me stuck. Being able to have both. I don't know.
Oh, totally. No, you said that so well. Like, I started to see my trauma really started to become uncovered when there was stuff that I wanted in my life, and there was a me that I was trying to become, and it felt like I was almost blocked from being that me, or there was just some momentum that was keeping me from being the me that I wanted to. And I started to realize it was because there was so much that I was in resistance to. There was so much, there was so many feelings and emotions and exiled parts within me that I was in resistance to. The shadow is manifesting itself all the time, and the shadow is always showing itself. And my shadow was there, but I was resisting it. And when I started to understand that the me, the grounded, embodied, wise, connected, open heart, loving Trace that I was trying to become on my growth journey, when I started to realize that there was something that felt like it was blocking me from becoming this me that I had in my head, I started to understand that the road to become that me was through diving into this darkness, diving into the shadow, diving into the trauma healing. And it was actually the resistance to all the stuff within me that was keeping me from being the me that I wanted to be. And it was actually about a release of the resistance and to go fully in and bring love to all those exiled parts that actually allowed me to kind of move towards the me that I felt like I could become.
And what's coming up for me right now is the wondering about, like, can we be the fully manifested, embodied, like, self that we want to be without moving through our broken hearts? Because that's what trauma does, right? It breaks your heart on many levels. And if you have never broken a bone, they say you're more vulnerable than if you have broken your bone and it heals again. So I think about that resilience with the heart too, right? Like having the experience of having your heart broken open, not only for others, but also for yourself, and then healing your own heart through that trauma healing makes it stronger and more resilient on the other side.
Yeah, that's the work right there. I think it's the psychotherapist Miriam Greenspan who says, like, part of the point of life is to have our hearts broken and then to repair them. And when we do that, like you said, it builds an incredible level of resiliency. We're also able to, like, sit and hold space for others' pain, because we can only sit and hold space for others to the depths that we've done that for ourselves. And I found, like, it's kind of funny when I look back on it. I used to, like, kind of try to intellectually figure out a process to develop more compassion for people and be less judgmental. And it's so funny now, actually having gone into my broken heart and done my trauma healing, like, a deep compassion just arises naturally for the pain and suffering of the world. And it's really funny to look back at, like, previous me pre going into trauma healing, Trace, how I used to, like, try to figure out how to do that from the head. And, like, there would be, like, helpful, put yourself in someone else's perspective, you know what I mean? Like, see all the conditions, and all that stuff's great and helpful. But it's interesting how the stuff that I was trying to figure out how to do with my head, once I went into the body, into my trauma healing, they're just a new level of compassion, a new level of embodiment, a new level of being grounded in the present moment just arises naturally. So the stuff that I was trying to get, it just arises naturally.
Well, there's more depth. I mean, like, literally and figuratively more depth, right? Because if you're going from your head to a more embodied experience, of course, that's deeper. And I don't know, I think that's probably been one of my superpowers, that I can sniff out depth, like, really quickly and easily, and haven't always been able to sniff out people's relationship with power. Just thinking about, like, modalities or leaders or people that I've been attracted to their work and whatever. I can sniff out your depth, but we also got to make sure that you have a relationship with power that has been examined and you're wise with it.
Yeah, and that, I would argue that one's sneakier. I think the power one is much sneakier, and I agree with you. It's tough to see that one. I think you have to see someone up close for a long time to be able to really see their relationship with power. And that one just has so many factors, as all these do. But yeah, the depth one, when you've really gone deep within your own heart and deep within your own pain, you just develop a sort of intuitive knowing and just a feeling about the depth of other people. And you just kind of feel it. It's like a nonverbal, just like cue and intuition when you're around other people. Like our bodies instinctively know who can hold space for us because of the depths that they've gone to.
Right.
It's a pretty wild thing that you have to go through to be really understand and feel.
Right. Well, and I'm curious for you, and this kind of is going to connect to what we'll talk about in Spiral Dynamics, like being a, self-professed, like, spiritual coach, like transformation coach, soul coach. So many people have trauma that has happened to them in religious community and spiritual community, right? Like, how do you reconcile with your own power so that you are keeping it clean, right? Like making sure that you're not harming anyone because you don't have an ethical code, right? And I mean, fuck ethical codes anyway. Like therapists do terrible things to their clients, even though we have ethical codes. So it's like, sure, yes, they're necessary, but also they don't really work. So not all the time. So how do you like keep yourself in check?
To me, my primary focus on my work has always been leading people back to their own empowerment and their own knowing. So that's always just been a primary orientation, is that I'm not trying to be I'm not even trying to present myself and sort of posture as a guide or an authority. I'm trying to be someone else on the journey alongside them that can point to certain things, can validate, can connect with them on certain things. There might be some aspects that people look to me because of knowledge and expertise I have in certain fields, but it's been very, very important to both me and my partner, Tina, who I work with, that when we're working with people, like it is us as humans in this with them. So like in our Spiral the Dynamics course that we took individuals through, we had activities for each stage, and we would do the activities just like the participants along with the people that were taking the course. And we consistently received the feedback of how healing the Spiral Dynamics experience with us was, because of how we didn't present ourselves as authority figures, and so many people that went through our courses had the kind of trauma that you're talking about, and even had trepidation. And they've really found it healing the way that we like oriented ourselves, that like we're not coming in to be experts and even really give answers. We're here to ask questions. And all of my work has been constantly reminding people of their own empowerment, their own discernment, their own intuition. And so that's been like sort of the intention and orientation. And I genuinely feel like I've done that really well. But then for me, and exploring my relationship to power, what's been the biggest key is to do the trauma work and the healing work around the parts of myself that are insecure or want validation, or because I've been around a lot of, popular spiritual teachers and popular authors, and I've seen the ways that their unprocessed and unlooked at stuff within them causes them to use their work as a vehicle to get the validation that they didn't receive. So I feel, and I'm not going to name any names,
but tell me later when we stop recording.
Yeah. Feel very blessed and grateful to have seen a lot of the beauty of spiritual work up close, and also the shadow of it, because it's helped me kind of transcend and include the beautiful parts and then leave behind the shadow parts. And I've learned a lot from watching the wounds of some of these teachers that haven't been addressed, and the way that the work becomes a way to get that validation. So that was a really, really important insight for me. And I had this early on, that like doing this work, if you're in a position where you have power, like there needs to be a commitment to constantly tending to the parts of yourself that maybe didn't get the validation and acceptance growing up. Because when you can give yourself that self-love and that validation, then the work is just an expression of that love within your being. The work is not a attempt to get something that feels like it's lacking within you.
Therapists, are you listening? Because this is what you and I talked about for 8 weeks, is my frustration with a lot of folks in the therapy community who aren't necessarily doing their deep work. And I think that therapists do have a lot of potential to harm people. I was just hearing stories from a friend recently who got fired from several therapists, and how traumatic that experience was. And, I'm sure there's like many details I don't know, but like, I think because, and again, this is like a spiral thing we can unpack later, but like, because so many therapists were harmed by power in their childhoods, or harmed by structure and rules that were too rigid for, what was right for them as a being, we disavow those rules, we disavow that power. And then in doing that, it's not integrated, and we can cause harm because that's the shadow that we're not looking at.
Yeah, no, so well said. I mean, to be a teacher, guide, therapist, healer, whatever title, like I feel like in this day and age, what comes with that, I feel like is a commitment to doing the inner work, because the shadow will show itself in the work. And unfortunately, the victims of that are the people that you work with and yourself too. And to really do this kind of work with integrity, I feel like requires that commitment to constantly choosing to like look at all of the stuff. My therapist says like, either you're making the commitment to just not look at stuff, or you're making the commitment to consistently just look at stuff. Like, hey, what's under this rock? Let me turn this over. What's under? And there's a certain, I feel like this, the next evolution of healers, guides, teachers are the ones that understand that a core component, a core aspect of doing this work is a commitment to the inner work and a commitment to constantly looking at all of the hurt and wounded parts and just really developing this like rock solid foundation of self-love for all of these different parts of us that we may have exiled or repressed or ignored, and understanding that that's the heart of the work right there. And yeah, it's so crucial, as we both know.
Amen. Boom. Tell us about, and let me frame this first, because I want to say, tell us about your work with psychedelics. I recently went to an event in Chicago that was centered around psychedelics. I didn't have a good time, only because, and you and I talked about this when we were working together, my fear of not only like corporations getting involved in the psychedelic movement, but also people who naively think that it's a catch-all fix for all people. So I just want to name these things because they're real things out there. And yeah, when I went to the event, I didn't see enough discernment around what the real potential for harm in all of this. So no offense, psychedelic therapists. I think that there are a lot of great, wonderful people out there. We just didn't get to have conversations. So it's okay. So tell us a little bit about how you're doing work with psychedelics.
Yeah, so everything you said, I'm really glad you said, because it's absolutely spot on. Psychedelics are a they're very exciting and promising field at the moment, and a very messy field at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I initially started working with a psychedelic guide, an MDMA guide, and that was my entrance into the psychedelic world. MDMA was a very, very powerful and transformational medicine for me at the time. MDMA, some people don't call it a psychedelic and don't consider it a psychedelic, and they refer to it as an empathogen, which means that it opens your heart. And so MDMA doesn't make you hallucinate and trip like classical psychedelics do. It's more of a heart opening. You're very loving, a lot of empathy, more clear-headed. And that was a very, very powerful, those early MDMA experiences were very, very powerful for me, because they opened me up to a almost, I'm trying to think how I'd explain it. They showed me that there was a level of self-love that was possible. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts I think psychedelics give, is the experiences that they induce can show us what's possible. They can almost give the peak of the mountaintop. And then the work becomes then doing all of the work not on a substance to actually develop yourself so that you can live closer to that mountaintop. So the gift of psychedelics is also kind of their curse at the same time, in that how powerful of experience they can induce and that mountain peak that they can show you can be so helpful and can catalyze so much on a growth journey like it was for me. But it also has the potential for people who aren't willing to do the work that they can develop a dependency on the substance inducing that mountain peak experience. So the more that I explore psychedelics, the more that I realize that they're really, and this is my opinion, but I really think that there's something that should be part of an ecology of practices rather than just someone's only practice on a growth journey.
I love that.
For a couple of reasons. When someone already has an ecology of practices, so like meditation, parts work, going out in nature, working with a therapist, doing their trauma work, psychedelics can be something that having a psychedelic experience every month or every 2 months or every 3 months can be something that just amplifies all of that and just up levels all of these practices. And when people already have a foundation, it's like the psychedelic experience, they can handle it and they can handle the integration work. But when someone hasn't established a sort of foundation of practices, like they haven't learned how to, regulate their nervous system when it gets in fight or flight state,
right.
when they haven't done any sort of meditation or consciousness work. I think using psychedelics as a modality on the growth journey can get them in more trouble than it is good, because also with psychedelics, they can unearth so much material and so much emotion that's held in the body. And if you don't have a foundation to be able to handle that, the integration process can be really tough, and it can actually send people backwards rather than forwards.
Right.
So I'm kind of going in a little bit of a tangent.
I love it.
So my work with psychedelics has been, I did a year-long program with the Psychedelic Coaching Institute to become a certified psychedelic coach. So what I do is I support people in the integration process afterwards. People who, a lot of the people I work with have used or use psychedelics as a tool for transformation, healing, and growth. And I work with them to help them prepare for the experience. And then I work with them in the integration process afterwards. And I also do some microdose coaching with people. So microdosing is taking like a small dose of a psychedelic substance on a set schedule. So you don't really trip when you take a microdose, but it gives you some of the benefits of the psychedelic experience without giving you like an intense experience. And microdosing is I've seen microdosing be a really beneficial practice for a lot of people that they've integrated.
I've been doing it. I'm fucking smarter. No question.
There you go.
Like, I am smarter. Yeah. My capacity for understanding has like definitely increased.
I love that you said that, because like I sometimes find myself holding back a little bit when I want to talk about like how beneficial microdosing has been to me, because I know some people kind of get like immediatutely turned off by like the psychedelic hype talk, but it's like, it does kind of make you fucking feel smarter. Like, I don't know. It sounds kind of like wacky and goofy, but like, no, like I just straight up like think better on this stuff. And the great thing about microdosing is, and you can see this from a kind of neurological point of view, is like the changes that it's making in your brain, the neuroplasticity, the recovering of old neurons, the making connections between new neurons, like that stuff does actually stay with you. So it's not like you're smarter on the microdose and then you take it and you're like less smart. Like the positive effects of a microdosing practice actually like stay with you over time, which is the really beautiful thing. Yeah, psychedelics are a really, really interesting field. There's a lot of shadow in the psychedelic world right now. Yeah. I've been up close to like two like main psychedelic communities, two of the biggest psychedelic communities in the underground world. Again, I won't name any names, but a lot of trauma, a lot of shadow, obviously a lot of trauma too, a lot of narcissism. And I have seen psychedelics, unfortunately, attract a lot of people who I don't think are really committed to doing the work day in, day out. And they develop sort of a dependency on the psychedelic experience, which only ends up feeding their spiritual ego about how, enlightened and mystical they are. So I naively, because my early psychedelic experiences were so powerful, I naively thought at first, like psychedelics will just have a positive effect on anyone's ego or growth journey.
Same.
And I've recently like started to really see clearly that if you have kind of for lack of a better word, if you kind of have like a shitty ego already, psychedelics can make your ego way shittier. They also, done earnestly and with intention, they can really make your ego much more diffuse and, more open. And I've seen them be incredible catalysts and tools for people's healing journeys and transformations. And there's a lot of people that wouldn't be alive if it weren't for psychedelic healing and psychedelic experiences. And I really, really believe psychedelics are going to be a big, big part of this next healing paradigm, healing evolution, whatever you want to call it, this new world that's being built. I know those are kind of, those might sound like new age kind of woo-woo concepts, but whatever this new world that we're building, I think psychedelics are going to play a big role, and they can make dense egos even more dense. Yeah. It's a messy world. It's a messy field right now. Yeah. And I think there's enough good in it that it's worth us figuring out how to use these in a really integrated, grounded way.
And for people, who are interested, I think my number one red flag when anybody is like interested in psychedelics is when they're using it for like a quick fix, when they're thinking that that's going to be the shortcut. And it's kind of like, it probably will be, but if that is your only aim, that's not the intention with which to go into this work. So that's one red flag I have with people who are searching. And And if you are a person who is searching, thinking, wondering if it might be for you, just use a lot of discernment on like not only what drug, what person you're doing it with, what modality, right? Like, because I had somebody reach out to me fairly recently and had a really, really traumatic, it's probably, she didn't use the word trauma. It was really intense and too much. And she did IV ketamine. And basically it sounded to me like the reason it was so challenging is because she was just like sitting in a chair with a needle in her arm and nobody was telling her what was going on. Didn't really know what to expect. And it's just, that's happening everywhere. Ketamine, places are popping up all over the place. I told you about this, like I had a really intense ketamine overdose, actually, recognizing I took too much because I didn't get enough details. Luckily, I was fine. I was underneath sound, you guys. It was pretty incredible, but it can happen to the best of us, right? Like even if we quote unquote think we know what we're doing. So just, use discernment, be cautious, and it's not even cautious, but it's just like, use some discernment. I guess discernment is just the right word.
Yeah. Start low and go slow.
Yeah.
It's like what I tell people who, like, I feel like a lot of people overdo it.
Yeah.
They do too much at first. Like you can always take more, but you can never take less.
Yeah.
So like, if you're interested in psychedelics, like I really believe in like just like wade slowly into those waters, start low, go slow, see what you're comfortable with. You can always like up it if you want a little bit more of an intense experience. Really, if you have people that you trust and can hold space for you, like really doing it with people, that safe people who you feel safe around, that's so important.
Yeah.
Like doing most of the bad experiences on psychedelics come from a poor set and setting, which set is intention, and then setting is the setting that you're doing it in. So like the story you just mentioned of like, and I feel for that person because this is like an official legal ketamine clinic.
Right.
So like it's understandable that this person wouldn't like think that this was a poor setting. Like I totally understand it. So it does take like some discernment and like some thinking, like, okay, if I'm going to be on a substance that I've never been on, my consciousness is going to be altered. What kind of setting am I going to be in?
Right.
Will that feel safe? Will I feel comforted? Like these are really, really important questions, and just be really, really deliberate, because the bad experiences usually come from like some settings that are just really poor and make people feel unsafe.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's shift into the question for the podcast that we always ask that sometimes I forget because we're having such a juicy conversation, but would you consider yourself a healer in terms of what you do?
Yes. Yes. And that's a term that I feel like I've owned recently. And it's actually been powerful for me to own that, because I didn't understand what a healer really meant or was before I actually started to heal my own trauma and go into my own shadow and go into my own parts of my own broken heart. So I don't refer to myself as an official title as a healer.
Like it's not on your business cards.
It's not on my business cards, but imagine a business card that just said healer. That'd be great.
It.
That'd be so badass. Someone's going to do that.
Yeah.
Someone probably has done that. But as far as like the archetype of healing, I really do feel like on a soul level, one of the things I'm meant to do is to be a healer. And being a healer, like I feel like takes many different forms. Like you can help people heal through teaching ideas, and you can help people heal by, we conventionally understand healing as like helping people do direct trauma healing work. But I think healing takes like many different forms. And I believe any work that is helping people become more whole within themselves is the work of being a healer. And I believe a healer is an archetype that we all play in our lives in some way. We play that archetype towards ourselves. We play the role of that archetype towards others. So it's been something that I've been leaning into more and owning, and seeing myself as a healer in all of these different contexts of my life has been actually really powerful for me.
Yeah. Because I mean, the way that I have conceptualized being a healer, I agree with you that everybody has that capacity. And I don't think it matters what your job is, right? Like I've had a hairdresser on here, and we talked about how she can be a healer, helping people feel beautiful. And, she also uses astrology to sort of like weave that into her work together. Healer is the presence that we have, not like our job title.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And like I think about even like my early spiral dynamics work before I was even really aware that I had trauma to heal. like the amount of feedback I got from my early spiral dynamics work that it was healing for people because it helped them understand new parts of themselves. It helped them understand and recontextualize their past. It helped them forgive certain people in their lives. It's like amazing to look back, like at before I even really understood the healer archetype within myself, just me doing the work that I was compelled to do and share the message that I was compelled to share. People, told me that that was healing for them. So that's something I've been thinking about too, is like how like all different types of work is healing for people for different reasons. And like really all of us owning that, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. How do you feel about the term wounded healer?
I love it. I mean, I think every healer is a wounded healer. I know, like, I think we're all wounded. I think we all experience trauma to some extent, some more so than others. I mean, I love the term wounds because when we speak about being broken or damaged, that has almost like a finality to it. And that I think can be self-reinforcing and can be problematic. The term wounds, we all know that wounds can heal. When you have a cut on your arm, it eventually heals. I try to be conscious about the language I use and talk about wounds that I have rather than parts. And I mean, I know we were talking about, the heart being broken.
Yeah.
And I still use language like that, but I love wounded healer. And I also like, the healing journey isn't something like, it isn't like a thing that we just check off one day and we're like all the way healed. Like healing is like a constant thing that we are doing. So I think understanding ourselves as wounded healers, like we're never a healer that isn't wounded. Like we always have wounds that we're addressing and ways that we're tending to ourselves. So I think that language that helps us see that this is a dynamic, ongoing process rather than a thing that we achieve or a box that we check off. I think that's really, really huge.
Brilliant. Samesies.
Great minds think alike.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.